In this lesson, we're going to look at some of the basic drawing functions in SolidWorks. So we're going to look at completely 2D functions in this first week. What we'll start with is we'll start with a new part right here. This is how, when you open up SolidWorks, this is a screen you should see. We're going to choose part. If you don't see this screen, you can click up here on the new tab and it will open up this screen here for you. Say OK to part. Okay, and so here is our drawing platform. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to a front plane. You see over here on the side. You right click on that, and we want to go normal to our front plane. That turns it so that it's parallel to the screen. Right click on it again and start sketching. All right, and when we did that, it puts in an origin for us. That's this spot right here, and this is basically a known location in our drawing tablet. And when we're drawing, to get our coordinates, our measurements and our coordinates correct, we want to know what this known origin is. So one of the things I like to do is to put in some reference lines. Now I've added this reference line, the center line, up here into my hot toolbar, and you can do that by right clicking up here and choosing which tools you want to add in. And I customized it and added it in this. So if you see this, you get it in your custom manager, and you can go through and you can search for tools in your customize menu, or go through and add them that way. So I've added in a Centerline tool, but to get to that tool, if you haven't added that in over here, you can go over here in this drop down right here. We have line and we have Centerline. So when you can see when you're in line with the origin, it gives you this prompt of the dotted line. So let's draw a horizontal line across. Now, and then you push escape. And what you can see here is there's a few things that show up with these little green boxes, and I'll show you some other cases of these boxes as we go along. What this is showing here is that we're intersecting the origin, and it's perpendicular, and so that's telling us that it's perpendicular to the vertical axes. And then this line is telling you that it's parallel to something. So this is telling you that it's parallel, and actually it's on top of the x-axis. So we'll draw another line here. Start here, bring it down, click OK, and you'll see and you push escape. You see you get the same boxes for these, except for in this case we're perpendicular to the x and we're parallel to the y. This just gives us some reference planes to draw off of. So the first tool we're going to look at is the line tool. So if you had selected center line over here, you want to go back, you choose line. Right? And line tool, this is just like drawing in any other platform. There's a few other helpful features here. So if let's start at the origin. We're going to click. We're going to go up. And you can click again. And then you can see that it gives you a few options here. Like it gives you some prompts. Right there, it's telling you that that's going to be a right angle, so a 90 degree. It gives you some options there. You see when I went back to that point, it then gives me an arc off of there. And if you go back to it again, it gives you a straight line. So let's do our straight line, and we'll draw that down to this point here. And we can say escape. Now, what we've got going on here is two lines, and they have an angle in between them. And we can do a few things here with this. We can go up here to Smart Dimensions, and we can click on this line and we can pull it off. And let's say we want to make this line 100. We'll say enter. And then we can go over here and we can make this line 100 as well. Right, and that changes where that vertices is, right? So it drops us down, so we have vertices there and there, right? And then what we can do then inside of Smart Dimensions, so we can choose length, but we can choose angle too. So if we go to Smart Dimensions and we click on this line and then click on this line, it drops us down and we get our angle here. So say we wanted to do a isosceles triangle. Well, we already have two sides that are equal to each other, right? So if we put a 60-degree angle in here, that brings this up, And now this length from here to here should also be 100. And you'll notice that these lines went from blue to black. And what that means is now we know the orientation of all the points that we currently have going on here, because we know our start point from our origin here. We know the length to here is 100, and we know the length to here is 100, and we know the angle between is 60. So that tells us where all of these points are in this drawing pad. So if we were to go here and we choose line again, we can go across and we can draw across and we go boom. There we go. And we can say done and done. And then that line automatically goes to black because that one we know has to be 100 across as well, right? All right, so let's go here and we'll go to Smart Dimensions. We'll click on this line and we'll drop down. What we see is we get this box right here. And what we can have here is that basically what this is saying is that because these two lines are already set and this angle is set, the length of this line is already determined. So basically what this makes is that what this is saying here is that we can show this length of this dimension, but it's driven by these values here. If we were to change it to a driving dimension, then if we were to change this value, it would change one of these other values. So we're going to just leave it as a driven dimension. And you see it shows up as light blue, not dark black, though this is the set value for that. And sometimes you'll want to do that when you're setting up drawings and things like that. You'll want to throw in some dimensions just so that you can see them. All right, so from there we can go and we'll go to our circle tool. So there's a few other things here. So there's a midpoint line. A midpoint line, if you were to select that, kind of makes sense. You pick your midpoint, and as you pull out, the line goes equal distance from the midpoint. I haven't used that tool very often. The normal line tool is the one I use the most often. So let's look at the circle tool. If we click down on the drop here, we have a few functions for circle. We have a center point circle, and then we have perimeter circles. So for our center point circle, it's pretty simple. We can go over here and we'll just click on that, and we'll go to the origin again, and we'll pull out. And you can see here, as I pull out, you can see that number changes, and there's our radius, right? And if we click there, we can actually type in a radius here. We can say 40, and click enter. And that gives us a radius of 40. And we say okay. So even though we entered that value in, this still doesn't have a known dimension to it. So we know it's a 40 for a radius, but the program still isn't calling this as a finalized object until we go into Smart Dimensions, and we can click on this circle and we pull off. And when we do that, when we just click on the outside of the circle and pull off to the side, this is giving us our diameter, not a radius. But a radius of 40 is going to give us a diameter of 80. We'll click off, and we'll say OK. And now you see that this went to a black line. So that means that this now is a defined circle. All right, and then our second circle here is this perimeter circle. In the perimeter circle, you work by choosing where you want your circle to be tangent to. So tangent to means that the two lines are just kind of kissing each other. So we'll choose this line and then this line. And you can see there that circle now is enclosed but just touching each one of the lines of the triangle. And if we click the checkbox, now this one automatically goes to a black circle because it's driven by the fact that it has to touch these three lines. These three lines have known measurements to them. And so that way, this circle has a fixed place in space in relationship to what the origin is. All right. So now we'll go on and we'll look at squares or rectangles. So we'll just pick this first one. It's a corner. It's a corner rectangle. And what we'll do is we'll let me go back to being normal to my screen. If you push Control and the middle mouse button down, it lets you pan sideways. if you just push the middle mouse button down, it lets you rotate on these axes. So I just wanted to slide it over a little bit. So we'll get over here and we'll draw our corner rectangle. So we can go off at this point here. We draw over and we click. Now see, so that was pretty simple, right? We just pick one corner and then we pick another corner. And then that draws our rectangle. And you can see now that it's not defined. It's in blue, right? So we go up to Smart Dimensions. Now there's a few things that we have to define here. We have to define what our lengths are, and also what the width of this is, and its distance to this origin. So the first thing we can do is we can click on that point there and click on the origin point and then drop this down. We'll make this 150. Right? And when we did that, you can see that it darkens out these two lines. They kind of have a place now. So these two lines are still going to drive what the length of these lines are, but we know at least that this is perpendicular to the origin line here, and this one's parallel to the origin line. We don't know their lengths yet. So if we go up here and we pull this one up, let's say that's 100, and we can then go off of this line here, and we can say this one's 50. And now that we've done that, you can see that all of those lines turn to solid black. They're all now driven lines. We can say OK. So another one of the rectangle, you see you have a few different choices here for your rectangles. You have a 3-point rectangle, just like your 3-point circle. Well, slightly different, but you're choosing 3 corners. So a corner here, a corner here, and a corner here. You have a center point rectangle, which looks like this, where we choose our center. We pull off. We go to here. And we push escape. And now we know that we know where this point's at in space. So we don't have to tell it where it is to the origin because it already knows that. But we do need to give it values here. So we can call this one 85. And you can tell as I'm going along, I'm just, you know, going with what my close measurements are for these. There's nothing, I'm not actually, you know, purposely choosing these lengths. If you were actually drawing something for class or to design something, you would be doing that. I'm going with something that's convenient as I, you know, roughly draw these in as examples. All right, so that right there is a center point rectangle. Let's look at how we draw an arc now. So we're getting a little clustered here. So if you roll your mouse button, you'll notice that rolling your mouse button zooms in and out. Once again, very common feature to other drawing programs. And when you push it in, like I said, it lets you rotate it around. We want to go back to being normal and click that button. And we're back to normal. So let's zoom out a little bit. Let's choose an arc here. And we can do a center point arc. So with that, we're going to choose where our center point is. We're going to choose what our radius of our arc is. And then we can choose how long our arc is. Right? And none of this is really defined because we don't know the distance from the center point to the origin. And we don't know what the radius is either. So to define those, we're going to have to put in a few values. So we can say, okay, go to Smart Dimensions. We go here to our center point. Pull this across. Let's make that 100 as well. We'll actually push it up a little bit and get it out of the way a little bit. And then we can go here. We can make our radius 75. Say okay. And now this line is dark, but our endpoints are still blue because we haven't actually given them a known spot, right? So this arc could spin on this radius around the center point in any place because we haven't actually told it where to start and stop. So if we go into Smart Dimensions, we can actually click on this point, go down and click on this line, and there we go. and let's make this 125. Say OK. And then we can do the same thing here. You can click on this point, go down to this point, pull it across, make this 125. And now that arc is fully defined. Now, like I said, this is very much a cluster. We haven't, you know, I have all of this stuff kind of drawn on top of each other, but it's just an example of how to draw these things in the 2D. So none of these measurements really mattered, but you'll notice that you do have to put all of these measurements in there to define where your shape is, and if it's not defined, they'll show up in blue. So if we scroll down a little bit, I can show you some of the other arc tools. So we have this tangent tool. So the tangent tool, do you remember how when we were drawing the line originally in the beginning, and I went back to the point and it started doing the curved line? That's what that is. And you can see here, I just picked a point here, and then from that point, I'm able to draw an arc. And then you can keep on drawing arcs as you go down, or you just push escape and it brings you back. Once again, we now know where this point is in space because we know all of these distances across here. So if we were to give it a radius and we were to give this point a distance, so if we went to Smart Dimensions, clicked on this, pulled off, said give it a radius of say 30, and then went to Smart Dimensions again, and went from this point to here, dropped down and said 250, which is actually what this length is as well, and say OK, then this is now defined as well. And then finally, and I think I'll go to a clean drawing after this, we can look and we have the 3-point arc. The 3-point arc is pretty easy to explain as well. You go, you click, and you can see that's the first point in my arc. There's the end point in the arc, and then this is the middle point in the arc. It's kind of a goofy way to draw an arc, but say if you wanted to draw 2 points, now there'd be multiple ways that you could do this, but say you had 2 ends here. You could go here, you could choose this tool, click here, and then say pull that point off like that. And then you could set up what this radius is and, you know, and figure all your calculations out that way. All right, so like I said, this is not very clean. So let's go and we'll open up a new part to go over these last few tools here. So we go new, click part, say OK. Opens up a screen here. Let's go front plane again. We'll go normal to our front plane. We'll go to sketch. All right, so we covered these 4 tools here. They're pretty basic. Next thing we'll look at is spline. Spline is kind of a free-form line. So if we click on spline, every time you put vertices in, it lets you then turn from that line. This would be handy, say, if you were trying to follow a curve around something that was natural, and you wanted to bring it in and add that shape to something that you were building. Or say if you were using this to do some sort of river designing and you had to follow the river line in a map, this could help you do that. And then once you've drawn your line, you can actually go back in and you can click on these points, and when you click on the points, there's some control here that lets you then shift the line around a little bit, change how it looks. And if you click and hold on them, that lets you do these things. So there's a little bit of control in this. It's kind of a different tool. I haven't used it much in what I've done with SolidWorks, but it is a tool that's there that you know, if you were in a situation where you needed to follow something that was more of a natural line and something that was a little bit more organic, this would definitely be the tool that you'd probably want to try to use. So then we have our oval or ellipse, and the ellipse is pretty simple. It's just like a circle, except for you're choosing 2 radius. So you choose that first radius, and then you choose your second radius, and that gives you an ellipse. And then you can do a partial ellipse. Partial ellipse lets you choose the center point, one of the arrows, and then the other. And then you draw around that. And there you go, there's your partial ellipse. And so the other 2 things, you can do a parabola or a conic. I haven't used those too terribly much in the drawings that I've done. Once again, probably a little bit more for more organic drawings, but they definitely could come into shapes that you might be drawing. We have a center point arc. I'll show you this next week, but in a little bit more use, but let me just show you how it works. You pick your center point. Once again, you go out for your radius, and you draw you 2 points, but then you can pull away from that, and it gives you this shape. And then this shape is can be used for a lot of different things, and I'll show you guys how to use that when we get into more of the 3D drawings. And there's a few different versions of how to do that. You have a straight slot, a 3-point slot, and then your center point arc slot. So, you know, straight slot's pretty simple. You pick your 2 points and you pull away from it. So, and then we have our Polygon tool. You can pick how many sides you have in your polygon. Your angles are going to be fixed, and then you can pull away from that depending on how many sides you have. That's how you do this. And then you can change in, you know, if you wanted something like a, you know, octagon, you can choose 8 sides and it automatically changes it in there. And it's got the circle that's built into that. The circle has a radius, and then all of these lines are tangent to that circle. So that's how you draw a polygon. And then we have these fillets and chamfers. These are actually kind of handy. You can do these sometimes in as a version of your 3D drawing, or you can do them before you turn something into 3D. So you can see here I drew 2 lines that are perpendicular to each other. I'm not going to bother to give them lengths. Actually, maybe I will, just to make this a little bit more meaningful. Let's say 50 and 50. All right. So check the box here, and then if you want it to do a fillet, you can click on this line, and then you click on the other line, and you can see that it gives you a rounded over corner, and in this case it has a radius of 10 millimeters. So if we say OK, you can see that that's now drawn into there. You have these other lines that are going across, but our solid line is this piece. All right, and so our next tool here is our Chamfer tool, and we have it set as an equal distance tool here with 10 millimeters. So if we click on this line and click on this line, you can see that it gives you a straight line across with a 10 millimeter from this origin and a 10 millimeter from that origin. We say OK. There's our chamfer on that line. If we were to draw another line over here, say OK. We can go and do a similar tool with chamfer, but we can say not equal. Let's say maybe make this one 15. And we pick this line and this line. And you can see now one of the lines is, one of the distances is 15 and the other is 10. And you say okay. Now what you can do here is you can double click on this and you can say this one is 15 as well, and that moves it. So you can adjust these once they're drawn. Finally, we'll look at our text tool, and let's go to one new part here just for the text. We can say okay. We'll go to the front plane again, go normal to the front plane, we'll sketch the front plane. So we have this, and let's pick our center point arc tool. Let me pick this center here, pull out, zoom around, go here, escape. Now I don't, well, let's give it a radius just because. Let's give it a radius of 100, say okay, and I'm happy with that. So we can close this. And now we can go, when we go to our text tool, that opens up this dialog over here. It asks what curve you want your text to follow along. Now this could just be a straight line. If we had a straight line there, you could pick that straight line. Or in this case, we'll pick this line here. That tells us we're gonna follow this arc. And then in here, we can type whatever our text is. So very simple. You can see that it puts it over here on the side, like starting here, but you can mess around with that a little bit. You can center it there. It has this checkbox, the default of use document font. If you uncheck that, you can actually go into your font here. You can change what your size is. This is just like any other, any other type a program that you might be working with. You have units here, so you can say how tall you want it to be. So you could actually say you want this to be 60 millimeters tall, because I added in an extra 0 there. Or you can go to points, and you can choose your points here, and say 36 points tall. And you see it automatically adjusts that there. What your units is. Let me say okay. You see that it's written up above. Some of the other things you can do is, say if you wanted to make this into a stamp, say you were making a stamp that you were going to cut out with a CNC machine, you'd want to cut that in inverse, so that when it's stamped onto the paper, it would spell it out correctly. So if you click that, it inverts everything. You can make it so that it's right now we're above the arc. You could go below the arc. And you could do this function here, which justifies everything, so it spreads it across the entire line. So those are just a few of the text tools that are in there. And you can use these text tools when we go to a 3D function. I'll show you how that works as well. So that's all I have for right now. That is most of the 2D tools. We have a point tool as well, but other than doing layout, the point tool maybe is not as useful. But we'll be using all of these 2D tools initially before we convert things into a 3-dimensional shape. So make sure that you're familiar with them. I will give you a handout for class that I'll have you guys turn in for homework, and you can just reference back to this video for any of the stuff that you need for it. Thanks.